Welcome to the Hands Up If You're Human podcast, dedicated to exploring and celebrating the messy reality of being human. In these conversations, we'll be discussing the many challenges and barriers we all face that prevent us feeling connected, fulfilled, and happy, and explore the ways we can create the lives we really want to live by understanding, accepting, and fully embracing everything that makes us human. From our innate gifts and the things we've been taught to think of as our flaws, to our deepest unmet needs and desires that we feel shame over, we want to explore all the nuance and complexity that comes as a package deal simply by being human. Recognizing and accepting all of our true selves empowers us to authentically show up in all aspects of our lives, and now more than ever, it feels like the world needs as much acceptance and authenticity as possible. Before we get into this, I just quickly want to provide a couple of trigger warnings. Today, we're going to be talking about Lisa's story, or rather, Lisa is going to be talking us through her story. I've seen some of the things she wants to talk about, and I just quickly want to add a trigger warning. There will be conversations around mental health, assault, suicide. I don't want to turn people off this conversation. I think it's going to be an incredibly powerful one, but I also want to make sure people are prepared for what is to come. My name is Wyndham.
And I'm Lisa.
Hello, Lisa. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, darling.
Good.
Discombobulated half term. So it's always out of routine, which is lovely, but it just means you just go with the flow a little bit more than you need to, really.
Yeah. I saw something this morning. There's a guy called Ryan Holiday. Have you heard of Ryan Holiday?
No.
He goes by the moniker, the Daily Stoic. So if you look on all forms of social media, he's on there as the Daily Stoic. And his whole premise is the Stoics of history and how they approached life. And that if we take on a Stoic approach, then less bothers us because we can predict a lot more of it. But today he was talking about, or I saw a video today that he was talking about routines are really important, but they can be very fragile. Like if anything throws them off and we're not prepared for that, then we can spiral and the day gets away from us. So actually having you say, well, routine's gone out the window because it's half term, kind of have to be flexible to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I just sent Jude off this morning to outdoor learning in the pissing rain. So it's like, there you go. Have a lovely day, darling. But
this is all about resilience, Jude. You'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Bless his heart.
Okay, so this is episode 5, and we're going to take the next couple of episodes to talk about our stories, about how we have got to a place where we feel remotely qualified to talk about life and to hopefully help other people with their lives. Today, we're going to be talking about your story. So, where do you want to start?
Good question, isn't it? I think it needs to start at the earliest time I now recognize as trauma, and probably why I kind of molded into a certain way from one certain event that started, I feel like, the benchmark to what I was going to experience through my life. So I have talked about this on the podcast before. I am one of 3 children, and my brother and sister both had a degenerative condition of the nervous system. I was the middle child, or I am the middle child. And so we grew up in Coventry until the age of 7, which was, my parents were quite young when they had my brother. He was 19. And I now look back as a parent and think, oh my goodness, like, for one, you were babies, really, 19 and 21. And then you had a child that wasn't progressing, wasn't sitting up, wasn't crawling. And being young parents, I guess it was, oh, is this normal? Just, I could imagine it being quite a scary time for them. However, when I came along 4 or 5 years later, I was the blonde hair, blue-eyed little girl that was healthy, and everything was, I think I did the most milestones at, the average time that we went to do the milestones. And I never saw my life as different having a disabled brother, not in a million years. It was just our norm. And he was like my best mate, and I didn't see a disability at all. But I guess I also didn't see the pressure on my parents either, because I was young. So I wasn't really aware of it.
We don't as kids, do we?
No, not in a million years. So before my sister came along, I do remember a time where My parents were obviously fighting about something, as you do in relationships and marriage. And my mum was extremely irate, and she thought my dad had locked her out of the house. And it was one of those times where you had glass doors, front doors, and I remember her being over the top, really, and the thing shattering and her getting cut, and it just being this massive drama, and me being taken out in my slippers, walking down the streets down to a friend's house and going to stay there for the time. And the reason why I say this is because when I had hypnotherapy, not even that long ago, about 4 years ago, this memory came back. And I was like, oh yeah, that's quite a big thing to deal with when you're 4 or 5. You know, your mum's covered in blood and you're being traipsed off to a friend's house. You don't have a clue what's going on. But it was all to do really with the stress that was going on with, at that time, just my brother. So my parents were told that my brother had cerebral palsy, and my parents were like, I'm not sure that's true. And back then, Dad worked for I think he worked for in engineering, and they didn't have much money at that point. And he decided that he wanted to take himself to Great Ormond Street so he could go and speak to a neurologist to talk about Craig. It was he needed an appointment to see this neurologist, but my dad, bless him, got the train, went to Great Ormond Street and sat outside the office of this famous neurologist. And the secretary was like, well, he won't be able to see you. You need an appointment. My dad goes, I am not leaving until I see this guy. Which shows their tenaciousness at such a young age as well, that they were very much like, we're going to get the best for our children, which again, I'm very much in awe of. And once the guy did finally, I wouldn't be able to know his name, but finally saw my dad and was like, right, yep, bring Craig to us. Now, I don't know where Becky came in at this point. I don't know if she was born at this point, or because I'm not very good with timelines, but I do know that they found out he didn't have cerebral palsy, and but they did say he had a degenerative condition that they labeled something called neuroaxonal dystrophy, and it meant his life expectancy was going to be very, very, well, the age of 9 is what they gave so he had a couple of years to live. So they come back with that, which is a lot, and then I do think that was after actually then mum fell pregnant with Becky. At this point, my mum was starting to show signs of something, didn't know what it was, and didn't even investigate it back then. I don't think. She'd just be absolutely exhausted. But you take it on board that she's got a disabled son who she's carrying around on it. It was a tiny little thing at that point on her hip. And then she had a young me pottering around everywhere. And then she fell pregnant with Becky. So it probably was after, actually, they went to Great Ormond Street.
And what's the age difference between you and Craig?
So there's 5 years between me and Craig, 4 years between me and Becky.
Okay. So
again, Becky was a bit of a surprise, I think, but mum was very adamant that she wanted to continue and have Bex. And lo and behold, Becky's born, and she started showing signs that she also had something going on. Originally, I think they actually felt like she had Down syndrome just because of the way she looked at that point. But actually, she had the same condition as Craig. But it didn't affect her as much. So Craig never really walked. He walked with a walking frame when we were younger. We've got lovely little pictures. It'd be nice to show people one day. He was a very happy, smiley little child, and just a little ray of sunshine. And then Becky was more capable, could crawl, could walk, but there was a delay in her development. So it was very apparent that unfortunately, Becky had the same condition. Now, for the first little while in Coventry, I went to this, like a local school, the primary school, and my brother went to a special needs school, and our playground backed up on each other. So there was a field. I used to go to the bottom of the field. I'd meet my brother at lunchtime. We'd have a little chat, and then we'd go back. We were really, really close. But obviously, it was a lot for mum and dad to cope with. So decided that for Craig's best interest, because the school wasn't that great, that he would go off to a boarding school, a residential special needs school in Oxford.
Yeah. And you say it's really hard for your parents to cope. Do you remember how you felt, given you had 2 siblings who had additional needs that you didn't?
So I at that point I just kind of went with the flow, but I was broke. I remember being really upset when Craig moved away, because I was really close to him all the way up until he passed. Like, we had a special bond. It was on another level. But I was adaptable. I clearly was quite an adaptable child. Like, I don't remember causing a big hoo-ha about it at that point at all. And then I had a little sister to play with. So, it became, she was then, me and her had a bond, and we played babies. And I actually took care of her quite a lot. I actually became Becky's from quite young on. When we then moved down south to Hampshire, and I look back and I think, God, I was allowed to take her to the park on my own when I was about 7. She would have been really dinky, and I'd take her out crabbing, and we'd sit on the edge of bloody sea walls and all of that kind of stuff. But Craig, bless him, he adapted well to his school, and mum and dad were like heartbroken leaving him. So, because he would cry all the time. He would cry even if people used to come to visit for the day at our house, and then they were leaving. He'd have this massive meltdown. He just wanted everyone to be around him all the time. But actually, I think quite quickly he would sort himself out in terms of, oh no, I can cope with this, and he'd actually have a really nice time. I could go on and on and on about that, but we'll get. So my child was quite different, but it wasn't. But
so I'm not laughing in a dismissive way. That looking after your sister at the age of 7, brother moving away that you were really close to. They're big moments that undoubtedly will shape anybody.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that at that point, well, you just don't know. You just don't. We used to also spend time at a hospice. So because they had degenerative conditions, so it would be like, okay, the first children's hospice, which was Helen House, was built in Oxford. So we then used to have that as our respite. It used to actually become our like kind of our holiday, because then I would then have time to be able to do things that you couldn't do because you've got disability in your family. Because once one person is disabled in your family, you're all disabled. You've kind of got to go at the pace of the most vulnerable.
Right.
So you are dictated by their ability. So you couldn't go off to Thorpe Park. I mean, people didn't do that much back then anyway, in terms of what we do now. But our holidays were limited. We went to what, I hate the wording, but it was called the Spastic Society back then. Thank God they don't have that, and they don't call it that now. But we used to go to Skegness and go to a bungalow there because they used to gift it to us, or it was at a reduced price. And that was how probably the most holiday we had, besides going to a hospice. And again, thinking back, I was a young child around all these children that were dying. But again, just taking it as if like, oh, this is kind of my
You don't know any
norm.
different, do you? It's
No different. And I guess it was time that I got attention. They used to do, which would now be classed as play therapy, but basically people used to take me out, and I'd go bowling, or I'd do things like laser tag and things like that, which I couldn't do with Becky and Craig. And I guess a bit of artwork, and they would like chat to me about how I was feeling and all of that. And at the same time, it gave mum and dad a time to be around other parents that were going through something similar. And so therefore you could talk quite freely and openly, and they had the support too. So my childhood was very much like around hospices. Craig needed to have a major operation one time where he had to put a metal rod in his back because he had scoliosis. So we were at what's it called, the John Radcliffe Hospital again in Oxford. So a lot of time we went to spend some time up there. It's the only time I remember really playing with my dad, which is really interesting because I'm really close to my dad now. But they had a children's play area, and it had a pool table in there. So I had the one-to-one with dad while, Craig was on the ward and things like that. So a really interesting childhood, but I didn't ever feel like I was deprived of anything. Okay. Even though saying that, it would feel, if you compared it, you go, oh God, that's like, a lot for a little girl. My thing and my nemesis, which again I've talked about on these podcasts before, was I used to get water infections. And now understanding the mind and body connection and all the kind of work that I do, is I must have been under stress quite a bit, and it was my way of my body having a bit of a meltdown. And so but I quite liked the attention I got from that. So I used to have to go and see a urologist. I then had to go to the hospital. there was a time that I had a reaction to some medication. Although I was terribly ill, I was just happy that I was then the one staying overnight in a hospital, and it was all about me.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, my mum's MS, which was later diagnosed in her 30s, any stress, my mum would have a episode. So I came out of hospital, and then it would be, oh, mum's in bed. So all of a sudden the attention's back onto mum. And I remember being so angry. Like, it's like, this is my turn. This is my time to have the attention. And it's kind of like, you've taken the limelight again, mum. And that's how I used to get so cross, because she didn't have a diagnosis, she kind of looked like a hypochondriac. And I used to feed into that, because I'd be like, well, as soon as things get too much for you, you go to bed. And then she'd lose the ability of her left leg. But as a child, I started to then, an older child, starting to go, well, this seems like a bit coincidental. When I need you the most, then all of a sudden you're not there. That I felt like it was an act, even though bless mum, it really genuinely wasn't. But there was no diagnosis with it either. So that compounded the fact that, like, this is made up in your head and not real.
And is that how you remember feeling, that it's never about you, it's always about somebody else? I'm facing whatever it is you're facing on your own, because the kind of pillars we're brought up to assume are going to be there, through no fault of her own, it transpires, but she wasn't able to provide that support.
Yes and no, because when mum was a great mum, she was great when she was focused on things, but she was always fighting for the best for us all. But ultimately the fight was bigger for Becky and Craig. And then she trained as a social worker, so then I was even more frustrated, because then, well, I wasn't back then, but now looking back, as I've gone back into my childhood when mum passed, going, well, that was a selfish act. Like, you had enough going on, like, and you had me, like, why would you do that? But it was to give her a purpose. I get that. And it was also, she was good at it, and she wanted to make a difference in the world, but external to her own life. So there were times, but then, when we went on holiday as a family, I'd be like an only child, because we didn't take Becky and Craig with us. So when we used to go abroad, but then it would be quite an adult holiday, because it would be
respite for your parents as well.
Exactly. So I was quite good at making friends. I was quite good at, even if I remember making like a friend who couldn't speak a word of English, but you kind of work it out when you're a kid. It doesn't matter. Like, it's play, right? It's like but yeah, on reflection, I was kind of not. I think I was given everything I needed. I was given a lot of love. I was given lots of opportunities. I was allowed to do all the after school clubs, and I got into drama very quickly, and singing and dancing. But again, I believe that was my way of therapy for myself. It was like, don't really want to be in this reality all the time. Some of it I do. But a lot of the times I it'd be quite nice to be somewhere else. So I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, I used to have a really beautiful way of looking at the world, because I used to make it so imaginary, and like, it was so like a musical. Do you know what I mean? Like, all very like, ta-da, like everything was going to be fabulous, or lovely, because that was a nice place to escape to at times. And with my brother, I always saw him as my big brother. And so when I was little, back when we were in Coventry, I used to be petrified of going downstairs on my own. So he used to bump down the stairs. He couldn't walk, and he would fling the front door open of the lounge and go and check. And he'd be like, Lisa, it's safe, you can come down. And so I always thought that he was going to be, the person to save me in a crisis. Yet when we moved, I remember we had to make a room downstairs. We had to obviously make it accessible. And I slept with him when he used to come back from school. And I had this, realization, oh my God, if we had a fire or we need to get out quickly, I'll be dragging him out. He's not getting me out. He couldn't, by then he lost all ability of crawling and all of that. And I'm thinking, he's never going to be able to save me, like, physically, and I think that's when, as you go, there's a turning point that must happen around 8, 9, really, where you go, oh, okay, right. You start to see things, not like an adult, but I think there's a clarity that comes at a certain age. So yeah, so that was my childhood, and I'm skimming past it. There's loads more to it, but just to give you an overview. And then,
so if you could encapsulate, and this is an unfair question, but if you could encapsulate your childhood, the version of you were when you stepped into the next phase of your life, can you do that with no forewarning?
so I think that I was naive and innocent and very accepting, but the drama, the dramatic Lisa was about to come out, like
Okay.
there were signs of it even when I was younger, but like I would run away from school, for example, or I would want to cut myself on the self-harm myself. Now looking back, that's how it's worded, by scraping my knees on the playground so I'd get some attention. And I think as I got older, that became bigger.
Yeah.
But so did the problems with my parents get bigger, and I kind of grew with that drama. And I'm not saying that it's because of my parents that I was that way. Maybe that was always innate within me, but I definitely started to struggle. And I think that my mental health was challenged when I went into puberty, especially. And I think that by the time I got to college, that was really tough. My dad had started drinking a lot more, and my mum's mental health was a lot more extreme, and her episodes of the MS was starting to become more frequent. And every time she then had an attack, as we called it, an MS attack, it was just our way of making it something tangible, she would lose a little bit more capability. So she would be limping a bit more. She needed a walking stick. We had then, I don't remember it all. Like, it's a bit of a blur, really, but she then needed to be in now and again in a wheelchair if we went out somewhere and things like that. And by the time then I wanted to go to university, which I was absolutely desperate to leave home. I was desperate. I just wanted to get out. Me and mum were like no longer this close bond. I was starting to do what teenagers do anyway and go, I don't like my mum very much, but I was really not liking her very much. And I think it was because her temperament changed quite a bit. I do feel that my mum possibly had something else going on besides MS. I do think there was an undiagnosed mental health issue like bipolar or something, because it was really extreme behavior, like really extreme. And then that takes me back to my first trauma when I saw her aggressive, trying to get through the door, and being the first thing I remember as a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah. And
normalizing that, because there's more and more of those things to come. And again, that's another episode, if I wanted to go into all the things my mum did. But when I got to university, I think I was fully depressed at that point anyway, but by year 2, I'd found my tribe, as it were. We were definitely the party crew.
Yeah.
I was introduced to drugs for the first time, and I loved ecstasy and I loved dancing, and we did drama. So it was all quite normalized again, that's what we did as drama students,
Yeah.
But not everybody in the degree did that, but my group did. I kind of escaped again. And I quite liked my reality then. And I quite liked the freedom, and as you do when you go to university. But my parents were struggling. And so I used to come back quite a bit to go and check on them. And mum would phone me crying her eyes out, and I'd be back there again. And my dad's drinking was starting to become even more apparent. And
so almost like it sounds like a tethered escapism. You could go away and you could embrace dancing and ecstasy and this new group of people who were more like-minded, yet there was always this tether that could be activated, and you'd end up being drawn back into it.
100%. So I think in year 3, like what it would have been, I was doing my dissertation. Weirdly enough, we were at the hospice that I was talking about, Helen House, for Christmas. And my boyfriend at the time, he was away. So I was like, right, I'm going to do my dissertation. This is it. We're going to sit down and I'm going to get it done. And I'd started it, went down to see Craig, and I went to get into his bed that night just to give him a cuddle. Like, he's totally basically can't move. Like, his disability is really debilitating by this time. Also, he's got a metal rod in his back. He's got a pin in his hip and all of that. And he burst into tears, and all of a sudden he was trying to tell us that something had happened to him in his care home, and sadly it kind of was led to us, like it was becoming clearer to us that Craig had been abused in a sexual way in his home. Well, that was just the turning point for everything. That was like, to me, was literally all three of us were like changed from that moment onwards. All four of us, should I say, even Craig. So my mum's mental health is already really bad. She's then now on another level, and my dad's drinking obviously must have got heightened. I went back to university. Well, Craig obviously got whisked out of that care home straight away. I then did the interim where he was in a respite place right before we found a new home, and I had to be there with the police to discuss what Craig had talked about. And they were like, look, we believe something happened, but because of his learning disabilities, because the facts are so not consistent, we can't go any further with this, but we do believe Craig needs to be permanently out of there. So he moved out of there, and then that was all at Christmas time. And then I think it must have been February, March time. My dad was incredible. Like, he's incredible. Well, they're both incredible. He was working as an MD for a Danish company, but he looked after the UK branch. So the main office was up in Durham. So we had a flat up there that they rented through work. And they were up there, as they were quite often, my mum and dad. And I got a phone call. I'm really stoned. I'm in my little la la land. And it's my uncle to say, your mum's thrown herself out the window of the flat. She's in intensive care, and your dad's at the police station. So I didn't rush because, for one, I was used to drama. For two, I think I was in absolute shock. Three, I was stoned. Do you know what I mean? So I was kind of like, so the next day I went, and I went to see mum. She was in intensive care. She had broken her pelvis, and they said to me, she won't walk again. There's no way she'll walk again because what she's done. But they don't believe there's any brain injury. And my dad, bless his cotton socks, was the last person to see her. So he was taken to the police station as attempted murder, or a possible attempted murder if she died. I turned up to the flat to find him there in a boiler suit. The forensics have been there, and there was a scene of the crime tape. And wow. And bless him, obviously he was drunk, he'd just in absolute shock. And he had called the police the day before because mum had sat on the windowsill saying she's going to take her own life. They coaxed her down, and luckily the inspector was really kind and said, I have someone in my family with MS, and I don't think people talk about the mental health side of it as much as the physical. I understand how much this changes person's personality. And I don't, and was really sorry for my dad. But my mum had then gone, once they coaxed her down, they'd left. She'd then gone into the ensuite bathroom, into her room, and thrown herself out of that window. So my dad looked down, and it's 3 floors, like it was the 3rd floor.
Oh, wow.
And she's just lying there. And he said, I assumed she was dead. But he called 999 again. They weren't even that far away. So they were back very, very quickly. And even when they took dad, they were like, we don't believe that you did that. This is a
procedural
We
thing.
have to go through that. My dad then ended up going to rehab, and through work, they took him to the Priory with the idea that obviously he couldn't leave the country, which he wouldn't have anyway. My dad was a very loyal, very hardworking, great human being. He's even more great now. But and that was the start of his recovery. And it was the first time he'd been away besides work without needing to support my mum, me, my brother, and my sister. So it was like, he said to me, it was like I've been taken out of the world for a month, and I've never needed it more than ever. So even just being taken care of with food, then you've got support, you've got the 12-step program going on, which he'd never been involved with before. For him, that was absolutely life-changing.
Okay, so all this is going on for them.
Yeah.
How is this impacting you?
So I crack on and decide I'm going to finish my degree, and be it that I didn't just scrape. I got a 2-2, but I reckon I possibly could have got much better than that if if things were different, and I applied myself, which was always what they used to say at school at the best times, like more capable, a bit of a chatterbox. My mum walked down the walked again, and she was there at my graduation, and I was full of anger. I was so angry. I was angry with the fact that she'd done it, that all of a sudden we were normalizing it, the fact that mum and her were like absolutely like not fine, but you know, they'd rekindled something, and I was just like, this is mental, absolutely mental. So I wanted to escape again. So I finished my degree, decided I'd work abroad, did a season in Cyprus as a hotel entertainer, came back, went off to Disneyland, which we talked about before. And I remember even being at Disneyland.
So you went off to work at Disneyland?
I went to work at Disneyland. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I went off again to put a mask on and play a character that wasn't me. And it was all singing, all dancing, all a bit really like I used to imagine as a kid that life was really like. If I look back now, I was kind of trying to create this illusion or delusion. Yeah. But I remember even being there was a time I got a phone call and someone said to me, I said, something's happened. They said, oh, you're being really dramatic, because I was so used to things being dramatic that actually maybe there were times I dramatized stuff. But lo and behold, my dad had got cellulitis from a bite, bless him. First time he's been in hospital ever. And my mum decides she's going to drive to see him. He said, just stay there, just stay there. She didn't. She drove the car. She drove back, even though he tried to get a taxi for her. She drove into a wall. So then both of them are in hospital, and I'm getting a phone call when I'm in France going, right, your mum's okay, your dad's okay, but he needs to be on a dose of antibiotics. But it was, like I said, just how my life seemed to roll.
Yeah. And did you go back? Or did you stay in France?
No, I decided to stay. No, I stayed. At that point, I stayed. I was like, there's, you know, I think I was starting to really detach by then. So fast forward a bit more, I decided, I basically then the cracks started to show. I went off to drama school and did a postgraduate course, and I was just not well, not a nice person.
And how old are you at this point?
Oh, this is a good question. I reckon I must be like 26 at this point.
Okay. So you got 26 years of, because you've been exposed to these pressures.
Yeah.
Because your older brother had the neurological issues he had from day one of your life. 26 years of drama, pressure, sense of the spotlight never being on you unless you create the spotlight. 26, you go off to drama school, and the cracks start to show. And again, a bit of a blur, but it was very, very, very dark. Like it got to the point where not only had I hit rock bottom, but my dad's had hit rock bottom again, and my mum was in a terrible state. So there was no one propping anyone up anymore. I'm like flailing around in London, working at bars, staying late at the bar, you know what I mean, and never learning my lines for anything. Just so disconnected from everything and everyone, with no tools in my bag. No one, I've not had proper therapy, you know, and I had a full-on breakdown. And a lot of people were like, we're just waiting for it to happen. But I guess you don't realize it while you're in it, that you're obviously showing signs anyway. And you look back on that and going, who on earth is going to get through all of that and not be affected? And the fact that you did get through all of that up until 26, 27.
Yeah. With like lots of bumps in the road, but yeah, I did. And I kept going, and I kept going, and I kept going. And yeah, it was a dark time. I mean, I think all of us at one point were just wanted to end our lives. You know, mum was doing lots of things again, trying to take her own life. I'd got to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore either. Had, you know, times where I tried to end it, but it didn't happen. But it wasn't really a true try. It was a cry for help. But
yeah,
in my head, it was true, you know. And my dad just like broken biscuits as well, you know. And he was yeah, it was awful. And I remember, bless him, it must have been the last time he drank. He hasn't drank for like 17 years, something ridiculous, 16 years or whatever. But I remember taking him down. I'd got a bit better and I took him down to the beach drunk. And he said to me, if I was you, his words were, I'd just F off and go traveling, which the doctors were telling me to do. You need to get out of this environment. It is toxic for you. And because I had no substance to me, I had no job, I had no home, I did have to keep going home. And therefore I was still stuck in this cycle. So I got a one-way ticket to Australia. No idea. I didn't even care if I came back. Honestly, hand on heart, if I came back dead or alive. I remember having that thought going, didn't have a clue what life had in store for me. But I did write to This Morning in my terrible state, telling them, it's so ironic, but I do feel like this was like a letter to the universe now, how I see the world, exposing all that and saying, I don't know what to do. They obviously wrote back saying they couldn't help me, but it sounds like I've been through a terrible time. And luckily I'd moved to Bournemouth and just for a small time. And the GP there said to me, because I've been put on loads of medication, there is nothing wrong with you. Like, you don't need to be on all these tablets. You need to go and live your life. And it was the best thing that anyone could have ever said to me, because that's what I did. And although I didn't care about my existence, I clearly cared. I had oomph in me for, well, it's got to be better than this, right? So let's go and give it a go.
The power of that. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, nothing, regardless of what is going on, regardless of how things are manifesting, regardless how you feel, there's nothing wrong with you.
No.
Like, actually, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with you, Lisa.
No. And it was amazing how many doctors were trying to make you try and find a label for you, rather than going, hang on a second, she's gone through all this trauma, she's had no therapy, she's got no tools in her box, and she's still kept on going. You mix that in with being a young person that was going out partying and all of that. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't like sat there every day drinking whatever, but I was doing what everyone else was doing. But my nervous system was absolutely shot to pieces.
Yeah.
So this GP was like, seeing me external, outside of it, you've got nothing wrong with you. Like, just go and live your life. I went to Australia. I'd started to self-harm at that before then. So I had cuts all over my arms, bless me. I made up this cock and bull story to anyone who saw her and go, what are they? Because they were quite like not healed. They were healed, but they were clearly like, a year old kind of wounds. I just pretended that I'd had an accident and made up. I can't even remember what story I made up, but there was a few stories that I used to have under my sleeve. And my friend said to me, there's a guy I know in Sydney, he will show you the ropes and show you around. I stayed in a hostel for a little while, went with him, and we had a few drinks, and clearly I was flirtatious. I had this kind of way about me anyway. Just I was always like that. Again, maybe attention seeking, maybe something again that happened to me when I was when I was younger. I remember saying no to him. I didn't want anything intimate with him. I woke up in the morning, I was clearly hammered, and went to the toilet, and lo and behold, it was obvious that he had sexual intercourse with me while I was sleeping. So
can I on this? You started that by prefacing it by saying, "Well, I was flirtatious. I don't want anybody, especially you, and I don't think you do, but I don't want anybody to think that in any way you are complicit in what happened. You can be the most flirtatious person in the world. You can be at the point of consensual sexual intercourse and say, actually, I've changed my mind, and that's okay. It is not okay to frame it as your fault. I know you're not doing that, but in no way at all is I'm going to use the word, even though it's an uncomfortable word, the victim of that in any way to blame.
No, but at the time I did, because I had no boundaries. Do you know what I mean? I had no self-worth. I had I didn't know what was going. I just had no idea about anything anymore. I just didn't trust anything or anyone, and yet there I was exposing myself, and and get myself really drunk, and I blamed myself a lot for that. However, the feeling the next day, I again now, I mean, for one, it would never happen. I'd never let it get. Well, I would absolutely do everything in my power not to let that kind of thing happen. But also, I continued to hang out with this guy the next day. He took me to a mind, body, and soul festival. The very first time I've been exposed to like all the work that I do now. I mean, the contrast of it is just unbelievable. And inside, I remember just being shaking, going, "Oh my God," trying to work out what on earth had just happened and how am I still hanging out with him. But I didn't have the energy, I don't know. I didn't want to reflect on any of it.
I think that's really important as well. That I think we live in a world that can be very judgmental, and people hear stories and they go, how could that person have, not specifically your story in this instance, but how could that person have let that happen? How could that person have continued in that situation? How could that person, if it were me, I would. And it's because it's not that person, it is somebody else. We do not know what that person has been through. We do not know. You were saying your nervous system was shot to pieces after 27, 28 years of constantly dealing with things. You find yourself in a situation that, as you say, you don't know how it happened. You don't want to reflect on it. And so we get stuck where we are. We act in ways that on my sense of it, I'm not a therapist, but my sense of it is it's a protection mechanism that goes, oh, holy shit, let's just take a second to figure some stuff out.
Absolutely. And I don't think I so then that chapter of my life started with trauma again.
Yeah, it's like this is interesting. So this is the point you are introduced to spirituality, to the universe, for want of a better word, is the same moment almost as this massive traumatic event.
Yeah, which is so interesting. The duality. I was thinking about this before. Obviously, I pondered about what to share on here, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to share most of my life, because I think it's important to recognize, especially people that are going through terrible times at this moment and have no faith in anything, is like, I was that person. I was anti all of this, what I now do and what I believe in. And the fact that I now feel that anything that is thrown at us is an opportunity to grow and learn from, and is part of part of evolution within our soul. I mean, you say that to me back then. I would never, ever, ever. I was angry. I was like, don't be so ridiculous. Like, I felt like the world was against me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's something about you that and I don't know why I've never asked you, but it's something I've always been like, how did you get to a point where, because you talk about soul iterations and the spirit within, the universal spirit within us choosing a human iteration to live and learn through, and accepting that as these are the lessons it's my job to learn these lessons. I've always sat there going, how do you get to that place? And not, I think it's like, you're certain, you have faith that is the case, and therefore can face the things you have had to deal with in the past, and the things that, I don't want to jump around your story. I want you to do that. But the things following this point in your life that you had to deal with, you face those things with such humility and, for me, grace. And I've always recognized, the first thing I noticed about you when we first met was just this energy coming off you, this before I knew anything about you. And then as subsequently we've got to know each other, I am ever more in awe of how you show up, because I'm not in the place you're in. I haven't suffered the things you've suffered, and my mind is still not in that place where I know I have faith in this is just this is what my existence is. This is the purpose of my existence, is to learn lessons. I find it remarkable. Sorry,
Yeah.
No,
and I understand, that, and I also think that, you know, when I delve into the second half of my life, really, it continues, and when I'm in the crisis, it tests me again. It tests my faith. It's when I've come through and I've healed. So this is another thing we said, is that the reason I can talk like this is because I've done a lot of work, a lot of healing, a lot of exploration to get to this place. However, the amount of times that I've been to a spiritualist, or I've been to someone who does readings, or a medium, they've all said, and they don't know my life, not all, but a lot of them have said, you came here to learn a lot of lessons in this lifetime because you wanted to evolve a lot this time that you're in this human form. And I'm like, oh, that so resonates with how I used to think I was just making it up, but now I keep getting like it's like concreted, like, yeah, this is exactly why it's been a challenge, and it continued to be a challenge. So even then, when I felt like I was starting to, as we call it, to wake up, and I was exposed to yoga, and we talked about this before, that I wasn't into it, but I loved what people were saying, and I had my first ever book, I think it was the Celestine Prophecy I was given, which was all about energy. And then we started to have like these moments of manifestation, and I'd need something and then it would appear. I started to get, it was still there. I still felt like the world was against me, but I was like, oh, there is a bit more to this life than this.
Darkness and trauma, yeah.
Darkness and trauma. And that's when I followed the route of yoga, and it would be nice to go into that more, but just to make sure we can get my life story to the present moment. You know, I did carry on traveling. I did carry on meeting people who were like-minded and were expanding my mind, and more training. And then I trained in all different modalities. I'd always go and have energy work done, didn't know how it worked, but it made me feel better. Felt meditation was really difficult for me, just really struggled because my mind was obviously really, really busy as well. Like, you know, constantly processing over and over again. And then you know, things started to calm down. I went and lived in the ashram for that 9 months. And it was when I was like, I really know this stuff. I know this stuff from not this lifetime. I don't know how I know this stuff. I'm actually, you know, like, you know, when you're at school and you're in a subject that you just haven't got a clue what's going on. I feel like I've been like that in most of the subjects that I did at school and continue to do, where this was like, oh yeah, this is my thing. Like, this is my thing. I've got it.
So for those who don't know, so if we'd had this conversation 6-7 years ago, I wouldn't know what an ashram was. You've just said in a quite, I know because I know this, but in a almost like a, not dismissive, but we'll just pass over the fact I lived in an ashram for 9 months. Very quickly explain to the listeners what that means. What does that entail? So
I believe it translates to spiritual home. This was a beautiful one in Canada, so it was very westernized. I wasn't sleeping on the floor or anything like that, and it was a place for me to do some spiritual work, and yoga being the main focus, not the physical yoga. That actually was very minimal, but we did a lot of chanting, and which was all really weird. When I first got there, I mean, it was wacky, you know, but there was something about it. I was like, not the chanting necessarily, just the whole thing. I literally felt like I'd gone home. It was the weirdest feeling in the world. And I was only meant to stay there for 2 weeks, which I did the first time, but I went back and did a 3-month yoga development course. And then to integrate that, I then went and I continued living at the ashram, which meant that you did what was called karma yoga. You do selfless service. So I ended up working in the kitchen, or, you know, they'd be decorating and you'd be a painter for the day. And at the same time, you'd start your day with meditation and yoga, and you'd go to something called satsang in the evening time, where we'd do singing, some would do a talk, it would discuss about Swami Radha, who was the founder, but everybody was there for self-development, really, on a big level. And I remember phoning home, like trying to tell my dad about it and going, oh my God, Dad. And like, you know, just trust everything's how it's supposed to be. And yet there's all this drama still going on at home. And I'm thinking back now, my dad probably thinking, oh yeah, it's if it's that easy, because it isn't that easy. When you're actually in reality of life, it's not easy to remind yourself that things are happening for a reason, and to trust in a power greater than yourself. But my dad on his 12-step program was very, very quickly got to the spiritual aspect of the 12-step program. So we were talking the same thing, but just in a different way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think a lot of those, when you hear people saying everything is a lesson and you are exactly where you're supposed to be, all these things, if you're in a point in your life that is terrible, or you're dealing with really difficult things, those comments on their own, without any context and without any personal relationship to them, I think can be very triggering.
Oh,
I think that you can sit there going, I did not ask for this. And then I was thinking about labels recently, and actually that the labels are useful I think insofar as they're kind of like the base entry point for a novice. It's okay, let me give you a label for what this is. Very base understanding. As soon as you grasp that, let it go, because there is layers and layers of nuance and complexity that you are going to have to work through in order to get to a point that you're at where you can say, these are the lessons I'm here to learn, and everything is where it should be, even the shit bits.
absolutely. And I agree with that. And even now, like the last lot of trauma I've gone through or life events have come through, in that moment when I'm in it, even if you said that to me, you know, I would be like, I have to go through the human emotion of this. I have to process this, and I have to feel it. I have to cry. I have to be angry. I have to have all of those things. And then I can say on the other side of it, okay, thank you for that. I've learned some lessons.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's like triggering again. And also, you're a human being, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. All of that kind of lesson learning, the lesson is in the experience of the thing, like fully experiencing it. Like you say, if something bad happens and you feel sad or anger or distraught or whatever it might be, the lesson isn't in denying that feeling. The lesson isn't in the lesson I learn is that I can move my mind away and my body away from the feeling that is painful. The lesson is through the pain.
Mm.
And you come out the other side and go, I've now learned something. Therefore, that's what that moment was for. I still find this very difficult, and I know how difficult I would have found this a few years ago, and I'd have been there going, I get how sincere you are, but it doesn't make any sense to me. It's slowly beginning to make some sense. And I think one of the things that's really important, and your story shows perfectly, is this stuff takes time.
Mm.
Sorry, I've completely interrupted and derailed you.
No, you haven't, and it does. And I think where I'm at in my life right now, I'm like, right, please just give me a bit of space now before the next thing that I'm going to have to deal with. And I'm not skimming over all my life, but just because I want to keep this quite in time so people aren't going, oh my goodness, my 2 hours have gone and I'm just listening to Lisa's life. But you know, I came back to the UK after the ashram, and I went from my everything, and I was different. And anybody that has gone on a journey of any sort, it doesn't have to be that big. Like even any of the yoga trainers I did, I was different. And transitioning back into the world that you came back, the trauma for one, coming back to where all the drama was, where all the trauma was so difficult, because also no one's then seeing you for this new person. They have still got the story attached to you that you were before you left, and therefore you've got hardly any room to be updated. So you are just stuck then back into, you know, you're different, then trying to explain to everyone you're different rather than just being different. And then having this like, oh, she's going through a phase, bless her, she'll get, you know what I mean? Like, oh, how lovely, she's found something that brings her peace of mind. And that's the bit that you go, oh, you're really belittling what I've done. But I get it, because you are where you're at and you haven't been on that journey. I totally understand it, but that's not me. So I ended
and were you at that point, were you able to recognize that the stories they were telling were about them, not you, even though you were the subject of the story?
No.
Okay.
I bounced around feeling like, have I made all this up? Like, is it again testing my faith in all of it, really? So I bounced back and forth, going off places still, just to try and keep that alive, I guess. Eventually stopped. and me and my husband met each other, and he had 2 children. So I moved in very quickly with Paul. It was just the way it happened. It wasn't like, you know, it was I fell pregnant really quickly, which wasn't planned. And sadly, I had something called a molar pregnancy, which is a mass of cells. It isn't actually a fetus at all, and it could turn into cancer. So there we go again. The first time you go into kind of a normal life event, it becomes it's a trauma, it's a drama. That was not very good. It wasn't good for me and Paul. We didn't know each other. Do you know what I mean? We didn't know each other. We've got 2 young kids that I'm starting to trying to work out how to be a step parent. I've moved into their world. They're not yogis. I've just been a traveler. I was therefore adapting to them rather because I was easy at adapting to things. So if me and Paul met now, I wouldn't be able to do that because I'm so much more sure of who I am. I'd be like, I'm really sorry, this doesn't work for me. So it was perfect timing in many ways. And we, you know, me and Paul, like, on paper don't match, but we do match in many other ways that we were, again, meant to be the opposite of each other to help each other grow in different ways. So again, step parenting, for anyone who's been a step parent, is it is a huge learning curve. It's wonderful in many ways, but again, you've gone into someone else's world. You're trying to find a bond with some children that you haven't given birth to. You're trying to navigate the way they work, but try and fit yourself in at some point and to be who you really are. And it was a challenge. At the same time, I did it really well because I've always been a caregiver. I was always looking after my brother or sister in some way. I ended up being very much caring for my mum, or was starting to care for my mum at that point. So I lived in an ashram where I did all the homely stuff, the cooking, the cleaning. I didn't just play the role. It was in me. Those tools were already in me. I was naturally a maternal person. But then I had so again, a molar pregnancy for one person can be their biggest trauma of their life. For me, it was like, right, got to crack on with it. And then I had a miscarriage. Again, that was another, oh my God, like, of course it wasn't going to be easy. And then by the time we had Jude, he was genuinely like the glue for us. As a family, we became a unit. We became, from rightly so, Gracie was I shouldn't say my stepdaughter was anti having a child because of course it was going to change the dynamics. My stepson was really up for it, thinking he was going to get like a brother or sister that was going to come and play with him straight away, not recognizing their baby. They do sod all when they first come. And luckily, once Jude was born, my stepdaughter was loved him from the moment. Luckily, weirdly, he looked very similar to her as a baby. So the whole bonding thing happened very quickly. And that was a real turning point for everything in my life. For one, because then I found it really easy being a mum, but I also had a healthy person to take care of. I was then changing nappies for a baby, not for an adult.
Yeah.
I had to focus on Jude and the children over my brother and sister and my mum. So I didn't feel guilty about not being there for them 100%. But in that time, COVID came along after Jude was going through reception age. My eyes were off Craig. Mum got really ill by this time. By this point, Mum is now more disabled than Becky and Craig. She's cared for at home. Becky and Craig were in a care home. And COVID obviously meant that we weren't able to go and visit Becky and Craig. And in that time, Craig's health was declining and we didn't know how bad. And there was a moment where we got a phone call to say the first time in a long time that he was being hospitalized, and it was dire and it was really, really bad. Like, he had been not taken care of well enough. He had constipation that meant that he was bunged up to the eyeballs. He had a hiatus hernia that was closing half his lung. He now started to what was called aspiration. So he'd been sick into his other lung. His lungs weren't working. They thought he was going to basically die that night. But it's COVID, they wouldn't let us in. It was just awful. But it was the beginning of the end for Craig, and I say that again very flippantly, in terms of this was his chapter now, where we were going, okay, eyes are back on him. And he suffered greatly. He suffered because the NHS sadly cannot support that many people who have got limited mental capacity. I spent 3 months in hospital with him through COVID, watching loads of things go wrong, loads of wrong information, loads of mismedication. And bless him, his little spirit just wanted to keep going, but his body was absolutely broken. He had to move into a nursing home. He thought he was going somewhere really wonderful, but again, we weren't able to go and see him. So we've seen him for 3 months in hospital. Then we weren't allowed to see him because it was restricted to seeing him behind a screen, seeing my brother the most vulnerable he's ever been, not being able to communicate. And at the same time, mum was coming to the end of her life. And I knew that it was always going to be dramatic when I was going to experience grief, or we were going to experience grief. I knew that they were going to die close together. I just knew it was always going to be that way. And sadly, they did. They died 3 months apart from each other. I mean, again, it's a huge chapter, that part in his life. And this is when me and you actually became connected, because I was doing my coaching diploma at the time, and it was horrific. And Craig died in the March through not being given the right things on that night. He actually was very well the day he came home that day, but we took him back to his home, absolutely fine. And on that night, there was agency nurse on that didn't know Craig. They didn't give him his normal cough assist and suction machine, which was part of his routine. And it sounds like he choked that night. So my dad didn't get there in time. I didn't get the phone call. When I got the phone call in the morning, I saw all these missed calls in the morning. I didn't know which one had died. I thought, could it be mum? Could it be Craig? It was obviously sadly Craig. But my dad came back from being with Craig, and obviously my mum's so disabled that she didn't even recognize that her son had died. So he didn't even have that opportunity to grieve with his wife. And then mum, I mean, I was shocked that she even survived as long as she did anyway. And then it was all eyes on mum. So the grief was very short period of time to grieve for Craig. And we went into supporting mum, and mum did do end of life at home, which was, again, I think I never imagined end of life to be like that. I cannot believe the amount of suffering that has to go when you know someone is passing away. Why on earth we don't find a more graceful, dignified way of doing end of life? I cannot fathom it at all. And she then died in June, so that was huge. But being me, I wanted to make good out of bad. So I was like, right, I've got all these tools. I'm now a yoga teacher. I'm now a coach. I'm now I'm a wellness, like all-round wellness person, that I can now, I've got all this time in the world. I can now go and do what I'm here, my purpose of how I saw it. But again, you can't fast track all of that.
With that, so you've lost two of the most important people in your life in a very short space of time. You know, losing family is deeply painful whenever it happens. To have those two events happen within 3 months it's not just double the grief, it's like exponentially bigger, because as you say, you hadn't had the time to process the grief around Craig. We knew each other by this point, and had you, when you were dealing with that, you've just said, you're a wellness person, you're a yogi, you've got all this experience, you're a coach, you have faith in lessons and making the best out of the bad times. Did you almost overlay that too hard, and that actually not focus on what was actually happening, the experience of the pain, and glossed over it?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I definitely did at the beginning. I remember writing the post about Craig dying, because I'd literally put a post up with me smiling the last day I saw him. And literally hours later, I'm putting up a post about Craig passed away. He must have come home to see us. I remember that post. Really, really like philosophical about it.
Yeah.
I think the pain came in when we realized he'd been neglected, and we then had to do a report and all of that kind of stuff. And the way that my dad was treated by the nursing home was absolutely devastating. They didn't even know where Craig's body was, and they didn't even phone us. Like, it was just awful. But I still wanted to believe. I still wanted to trust in my faith. Like, so, yeah, I definitely did rush that, and I wanted to not do the humanness of being a human and fully process it. I also think I was terrified of having a breakdown. I knew I was not going to have a breakdown, but I'm thinking, I do not want to repeat what I did in my mid-20s again. And I think that was where the scary bit was. It's like, I cannot go there again. I didn't. And of course I wasn't going to. Well, of course I wasn't. I was evolved enough that I wasn't going to. I'd learned enough. But it was terrifying to think that if I stop and I feel and it feels too bad, then I might not start again.
Yeah. And how long did that go on for? I'm going to keep going. I'm going to fill my life with busyness, and I'm going to push forward on so many other fronts. When did that come to a point where you went, I need to feel this?
I think I was still feeling, but the reality of it, I look back now, and I think I've only just started to go, I don't need to do as much as I thought I needed to do. Actually, I can have a lot of space between things and do some really poignant work, much more helpful to those people that I end up being of service to, rather than it's like I needed to prove myself. It felt like I needed to prove, for one, I believe in what I believe in. Two, I've got all the space in the world now. My stepchildren have grown up. My little boy is 8, so he's like less needy. Like, it's much easier with one under teenage years. And so why wouldn't I be spending my time with all the, these? It felt like it was always excuses that why I hadn't achieved what I wanted to achieve yet, whatever that was. And I still don't even know what I want to achieve. I just want to be a decent human being that helps people with what I've learned along the way, ultimately. It doesn't need to be grand. If it is, great, but that's not the goal. But I felt like I needed to be something besides my story, if that makes sense. I feel like my story dictated who I was for a long time, and that was all I knew. Where actually I'm like, yes, it's made me who I am. It's shaped the person I've become. It's the lessons I needed to learn in this lifetime. But actually, besides that, there is also me. That is me for me.
It's really interesting. There's I think we've spoken about him before, but Johnny Wilkinson, ex-rugby player, is on a spiritual adventure and has his podcast and all that kind of stuff. And when I first heard him talk, he was there saying most people think we are the product of our past. But he doesn't believe, he's again, that's not true. Our past is a product of who we are now. And what I'm taking from your story is, in those moments, all those years ago, you're being shaped by the experience, but now you're at a point where you go, actually, the person you are now reflects back on those experiences, and you're taking something very different from them, which is exactly what he was talking about. It's like your past is now a product of who you are, because you're shaping it differently, rather than you being the product of the past keeping you trapped. You've learned and moved past it to the point where you're shaping it.
Absolutely. And I listened to that podcast, and I totally got what he was saying.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Not him, although he is as
well. Would I have got to this place without that story, without those experiences? I would have had different experiences. That's all I think is that I was coming here for this lifetime to learn a lot. It would have just been different events that would have got me here.
And that I think is interesting as well, because so often we get trapped in this, I wish it hadn't happened. I wish it were different. I regret that. If only I could change that, about things we cannot change. And so that kind of acceptance, I know you and I want to have one of these episodes where we talk about acceptance, but that you are a demonstration of, well, I can't change it. So what What can you do?
And I genuinely,
You've got to accept it.
and I'm genuinely grateful. Like
Which is, yeah.
I mean, you know, you listen to people who are very much into a religion, and I get what they're saying. I don't care what religion it is. I don't. It's just, to me, it's all this. It feels the same to me.
Mm.
And when people say, you know, like you know, terrible, terrible things where someone's been murdered, and they say, I feel sorry for them, you know, and they believe in God so much, but I get that on my understanding of the greater, what's greater than the physical form. I am incredibly grateful. I'm grateful for all of my family members. I'm grateful for all of the pain and the suffering, because I've learned and I've become, I believe, a much nicer kind of human being than I think I would have been without all of those things. And you've made me go on a path that not many people, the road less traveled, it's a lonely path. It's not as lonely now. There's a lot more people doing it. But back like 15, 17 years ago, however long ago it was, 20 years ago that I started on it, it was a lonely journey. Mm. And it's not. I don't care it's a lonely journey. It's the only journey I want to go on. And I'm unapologetically for it. And I do hope I have grace between another big life event. I do feel that you know, it'd be nice to have a bit of ease now, but I am grateful for every single thing that's come my way.
That's amazing. Is there anything else you want to add at this point? We know there are lots of elements to your story that we could go into greater depth with, and at some point we will. But for today?
No, I just think, you know, it was quite a lot to try and fit in a short space of time. And I don't want anyone to think that I am being flippant about any of it, because I'm not. I remember my first yoga teacher challenging me, going, why are you smiling saying this? This was when it got to the point where the trauma with mama, and it was like the biggest pinnacle point, I feel like, in my life at that point. And I was like, it was my coping mechanism to smile, but it was a story, where now it's like, don't think that I think that this is not a big story to share. It's the fact that I've done a lot of healing and a lot of exploration around it, that I can this wasn't uncomfortable for me to do. I didn't panic about it last night. I'm like, this is it. This is the reality that I've lived up until the age of 40, whatever I am, 43.
It's what I find really interesting is I think how your story has always landed with me is like, oh my God, how can you deal with so much? And it's listening to you speak, it's almost like, well, the how is broadly irrelevant. We're all incredibly resilient, and you have found a way. What the way you found it through yoga and spirituality and energy work and embracing the greater power of the source, the universe, God, however you want to refer to it, or however anybody else wants to refer to it. And there is so much power in that, in the whole kind of surrendering to what we are experiencing. And surrendering isn't giving into, it's, well, this is it. So what am I going to do? What am I going to learn? How am I going to process this? And I think, I mean, I've said it before, but I am in awe of how you do that. And it's inspirational to me to speak with someone who, it's so authentic and so real and so true that it helps me sort of put elements of my life into perspective and go, okay, that's shit. True. What am I going to do with that? Because the lesson is the lesson is mine to learn. Where do I find it? How do I process it? How do I move on a better, more evolved, more complete human being? So from my perspective, thank you so much for sharing your story so openly. I know there are bits in it that people will find difficult, and that's okay. That's like, life is difficult, but thank you so much.
Well, there's just before that, like, just so to end, I just want to say, regarding, it did help that my dad also went on this journey with me. So my dad is a very evolved, incredible, beautiful soul that that's made it much, much easier. Do you know what I mean? In terms of he's very in the same mindset as me, and he went through a lot more than I did in many ways. It was his whole entire life. My guilt came from my had some kind of normality by having children that were healthy and we could do normal, you know, and a whole different. When we talk about grief, my grief was very interesting journey, because I didn't understand what grief was until I've grieved. But also, don't belittle anything that you're going through. Go, well, my stuff isn't as big as that. If it's hurting you, if it's uncomfortable, if it's triggering, if it's difficult and challenging, I find the smaller things more challenging to deal with than the crisis, because I learned how to deal with crisis very early on. So never ever belittle or go, oh, that makes put things in perspective. I think it doesn't matter what it is. It might be that someone stubs their toe in the morning and their day is absolutely ruined. Do you know what I mean? Like, we shouldn't compare.
We get caught in comparative suffering, don't we? And then when we do that, we think, well, I don't have the right to feel the way I do about this little thing when somebody else is going through so much more. And you're absolutely right. It's not true. Somebody going through more doesn't diminish what you are going through.
No, absolutely. Right, let's wrap it up, because I feel like I kept you and everybody.
So you've been talking for an hour.
Yeah.
But well, it's not something I don't, even though I know you've abbreviated it. It can't have been abbreviated anymore. Right. So thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, listeners. We really appreciate those of you who have supported the podcast and are downloading it and listening to it and sharing it and rating it and reviewing it. Please keep doing so. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us handsupifyou'rehuman@gmail.com. If you want to be anonymous, please let us know, and we absolutely will respect that. If there's anything you want to contribute or you'd be interested in us talking about, please let us know. Our next episode is going to be my story. But until next time, once again, thank you very much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate your transparency and honesty and authenticity.
Well, you make it easy to talk to us, talk it out aloud, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the story, because I do think it will be of support to people out there listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and we will speak to you again very soon. Take care.